Hey guys, my name is FAISAL HASHMI, and today I want to talk about a question that I've been asked really often throughout the years. Now, imagine this scenario, right? You want to make a film. You've been really inspired watching all these filmmaking tutorials on YouTube, and you've seen all these great directors talk about their films, and now you want to make your first short film, your first feature film. So you open the script writing software, you sit in front of that blank page, and you want to write. But you can't because you don't know what your movie is about. You don't have an idea for a film. Well, this is something a lot of people I know struggle with. Generating story ideas. What do I write about? Well, it's something I don't really struggle with. I have a ton of movie ideas at my disposal at any given time, and I'll tell you why. Because these are the 5 tips that work for me for generating story ideas. Here we go. Now, tip number 1 is thinking in what if. Now, what if is more of a mindset, right? Where you have to live your life, sort of gear yourself into finding stories in everything that you see or hear. Right now, every single story that you can think of can be distilled down into a what if. What if a character, could be any character, is put into some kind of extraordinary, dangerous, interesting scenario where they have to sort of beat different obstacles to kind of find their way out of it. Try to find that in your real life. So I'll give you an example of something that actually happened to me a couple of years ago. I was driving on the road with my mom. I was trying to drop her somewhere. This is at around 1 a.m. at night, right? And we passed by this really dark, remote looking area. And as I'm driving past through, we see one person on the footpath just walking. And as he sees our car, he starts waving his hand looking for a lift, right? So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I just try to go and stop at that guy's, try to give him a lift. But then my mom tells me there is no car nearby, there is nothing, there's no house, there's nothing nearby. What is this guy? What is he looking for? It kind of just the whole thing just gave her creepy vibes, and she said, you know what, don't stop, just keep moving on. This is kind of weird. So I said, all right, that makes sense. So instead of just stopping there, I just kept moving on. And the moment I started moving on, this person just started running behind the car at full speed. He just started running behind the car. That was really freaky to watch. And as my car sort of got distance away from him, he just started walking. He just switched to completely normal and just started walking the way that he was before. Nothing else. And that was such a creepy moment that actually happened to me in my real life. And it got me thinking, what is the worst thing that can happen to a character in that situation, which was me and my mom? Well, what if my car a few minutes later just actually breaks down? Right? And now we're in the middle of the dark, stuck somewhere, trying to figure our car out, and we start feeling that this guy is around us. Imagine all those circumstances. So the whole reason I went through this whole story is to give you the idea that everything in your life, even the most mundane, even a creepy thing, is prime for a what if scenario if you just open up your mind to it, right? Anything that your friend says that happened, something funny happened, something odd happened to them, take that, see what's the most cinematic way to approach that weird situation. What's the worst thing that can happen to a character in that situation? So once you start sort of living your life, trying to find a story in every single scenario that you live through, you'll find story ideas coming a lot easier to you. Tip number 2 is second guessing films. Now, you as a filmmaker, I'm hoping are watching a lot of movies very regularly. One tip is to always try to be guessing what's going to happen next. If you're watching a mystery, a horror film, a thriller, even a comedy, try to figure out the film before it even reaches there. Always try to figure out what's the coolest direction this film could take. What's the cool twist? Try to second guess, maybe there's a twist ending to the film. What's the wackiest thing that could happen, right? More often than not, the film will probably take a more mediocre direction and actually not go in the direction that you were hoping for. And guess what? Now suddenly you have this very cool idea in your head that this movie did not use, and now it's prime for you to just take that and make it into your own film, right? So second guessing films is really interesting because it just kind of gets your mind into this kind of creative problem solving mode, which is what you need as a screenwriter. Now, unfortunately, doing this might actually ruin films for you in certain cases where you might actually predict what the ending of the film is going to be, which is cool. I still enjoy the film. Knives Out is an example where I actually was thinking this way through the whole film, and I actually predicted that ending way before it was actually revealed to people. So that's a downside to it, but you know what? It's a small price to pay for you to be able to have a diary full of ideas for movies that you can use for your own films. Tip number 3, and this is the most useful tip out of all of them for me. This is what I rely on a lot when I'm coming up with especially short film ideas, is give yourself writing prompts. Now, what does that mean? Look, when you're looking at a blank page, it can be really daunting. You don't know what you're going to write because your mind can go in any direction, your story can go in any direction, and that's a daunting task. Give yourself a writing prompt or have somebody else give you a writing prompt. That could be a character. For example, somebody challenging yourself, or somebody challenging you to write an entire short film that is following a taxi driver as a character, right? Suddenly you have something to work with. So you're like, what could be an interesting take for a taxi driver? Well, maybe he witnesses a murder. Maybe that's been done before. Maybe a something like Collateral, where a serial killer is using his car, an assassin is using his car, maybe a funny little rom-com with a certain passenger he's stuck with. There's so many. Now suddenly your mind is kind of shifting into gears and trying to imagine what is the most interesting thing that you can do with the character of a taxi driver. Another example of a prompt could be a location, right? This is something that's been really useful to me. So I did a film called Flight, which takes place entirely in a radio station, and the only reason the film exists is because I gave myself that writing prompt. I find radio stations to be such an interesting location. It's such a lonely job. So I was like, what's an interesting story that can happen within a radio station? And just workshopping a few ideas, I found what I think to be a pretty cool idea. It's a short film that a lot of people like, but the only reason the short film exists is because I gave myself that limitation, which led to the creation of this idea. If I had to just sit in front of a computer on a blank page, I don't think I would have come up with that idea. Another example of a writing prompt is a prop that's really central to the story. So what if your story has to do with a Roomba? Or what if it has to do with a certain envelope or a baseball bat? You might think you're being boxed in, but actually giving yourself that limitation can actually lead to you and your mind working overtime to come up with a cool idea as a challenge within that scenario, something that you would never have come up otherwise. So give it a shot and let me know how it goes. Now, tip number 4, and this is actually really, really interesting, it's flip the protagonist. I'm gonna make a more detailed video exactly about this point, but the idea is you can take a mundane story that's been told 1,000 times before, but completely make it original by just flipping the person we are seeing this film from. Who's the protagonist, right? Look at Star Wars, Empire being attacked by rebels, but what if you tell that kind of story from Darth Vader's point of view? Suddenly you have this film similar to Downfall, which is about Hitler's empire coming down, how he sort of deals with that. You can kind of go in a weird character piece with something. Don't change anything. You're just telling it from a guy who's facing losses after losses and just start seeing that everything around him is coming down, right? What if a Purge films, like I love the Purge movies, but what if the Purge films were from a point of view of a guy who's actually purging, a guy who just thought this is gonna be a fun thing to do, but suddenly sort of realizes that he's in over his head and has to now escape these purgers themselves who are just committing murder everywhere. Or what if it's a bank robbery film? Now we've seen thousands of bank robbery films, right? They usually follow either the cops or the criminals, right? But what if this follows sort of a mundane character like a bank clerk, right? Or a janitor who just sort of was caught in the crossfire, was completely mentally traumatized with that event and just sort of seeking his own revenge outside the law, right? That would be an interesting take. Look, these are just ideas that I'm spitballing, but the idea is you can take something that exists in a movie or in 1,000 movies and just flip the point of view to something unexpected, and suddenly you have a really, really cool film that you can keep to yourself. And the final tip number 5 is read the news. Now, I don't mean you go and read the world politics, CNN, BBC, what all these presidents are up to. I mean, find the most weirdest, bizarre, funniest, viral stories that are out there. And sometimes truth truly is stranger than fiction. Look at this news story. This happened a couple of months before recording this video. Now, tell me, reading this headline, you don't see a film plot right here. I wouldn't be surprised if this immediately becomes a film in the next couple of years. You might be watching this in a couple of years and this is a funny horror comedy on the air or on Netflix. You can just look at this scenario and immediately imagine the protagonist, the humor that could come from it, the kind of things you can play around with this thing. And it's based on a true story. So always be on the lookout on Twitter especially, or just these kind of funnier news outlets to see the weird things that happen in life. And sometimes that will really inspire your storytelling process. So that's it for the 5 tips, but before I end, I want to say something really important, which is the idea is just a small piece of the puzzle, right? Execution is far more important than the idea. So don't stress it. You need an idea for sure to be able to write your film, but movies are made or broken based on how they're executed, right? There are films that have the most mundane plots, are just boring character studies, but they have such immaculate execution that you just have to watch them and they win all the awards. But these tips will get you come up with the basic idea for your film. And then it's all up to you in terms of how you can craft your protagonist, your dialogue, your twists and turns, and just make something really, really exciting for people to watch, whether it's a short film for 10 minutes or whether it's a feature film for 90 minutes. If you have any tips or tricks that you use to generate story ideas, I would love to hear in the comments because they would help me out too. There are a lot of writing, directing, editing tip videos that I'm working on right now, so do subscribe so you're in the loop. But until then, don't just move the camera, move the audience. Cheers.